Hello and welcome to today's webinar on searching databases on AmericanAncestors.org. My name is Ginevra Morse. I'm the Director of Education and Online Programs here at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. I'll be moderating today's event. NEHGS is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer this webinar today for our members and friends around the world. And giving today's presentation is Associate Director of Database Search and Systems, Don LeClair. Don helps manage the applications and processes that support NEHGS's online database collections. He first got involved with genealogy while in college and spent many a day in the NEHGS library, tracing his ancestors through New England and New York. Don has 30 years of experience in the software industry, and he has a BA and an MBA from Boston University. So, as you may be aware, AmericanAncestors.org currently holds more than 1.4 billion, that's billion with a B, searchable records with new databases and names being added each week. So today we'll go over the scope of those databases, what types of records do they include, what geographical regions and time periods they cover, and what is unique to our site. We'll also go over how to access those databases, whether you are a guest or a research member. But much of the session, however, will be spent on how to leverage search terms and the advanced search fields to find your ancestors. And finally, we'll hear about some improvements being made to the website. At any time during the presentation, please feel free to write a question in the panel to the right of your screen. Our presenter will answer as many as he can in the time provided. There is no handout for today's presentation, but you will find a subject guide, a really helpful subject guide on using AmericanAncestors.org in the Read section of our online learning center. You can see a full link to that on the screen in front of you. But I will also include that link in my follow-up email to you. We're also recording this event, and so starting tomorrow, you can easily go back and review any of the content from the presentation on our website. So if during this first listen you don't catch something, don't worry. You can go back and pause, rewind, fast forward, and listen to it again. All right, so with that out of the way, I will turn things over to Don.
Thank you, Ginevra, and thanks all of you for joining today. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to talk to you about searching databases at AmericanAncestors.org. As Ginevra mentioned, my job is really sort of twofold. I work with both what's the technology and the whole infrastructure we use to deliver these search and records to you. And then, we're also directly involved as part of the web team is getting a variety of new databases and new content online and available for your search efforts. So we'll take this opportunity then to provide some perspective on the overall scope of our databases, and then we'll start diving into how you get at the data. So as Jennifer mentioned, we have 1.4 billion searchable names out there, which is quite a bit of information. We categorize that into 455 individual databases, and that number will fluctuate as time goes. We typically are adding new collections, but occasionally we will go back and do some rework of some of our older databases and maybe combine them. So you'll see that number changes on a fairly regular basis. But within those, to try to give you a better understanding of what we have, I thought I would give you some views of what we have here. So of those databases, of 455 databases, you can see this big green segment of the chart is showing that this is what we have for our vital records part of the database. So about a little over half of our available information is tied to vital records, which is certainly, as a genealogist, some of the most useful things, giving you birth, marriage, death, that sort of information. Other significant pieces would, of course, be census, tax and voter lists. One of the areas in which we have quite a bit of information is in genealogies and biographies. And then probably the next largest piece is the court, land, and probate. And we'll talk about some of these as well. But I think probate is maybe for the beginner one of the more underutilized areas of research, and having information about the estates and wills and that sort of thing of your ancestors can be very useful in finding out a lot more information about how they lived and who was in the household, those sorts of things. So if we go forward, this is not just New England. The website is branded American Ancestors. We do have, even beyond America, databases and records from many different countries. So yes, the largest part of our collection is from the United States, but you can see some of the examples here. Certainly we have a lot of records related to England and Ireland and the British Isles, but as well as other parts of Europe, as well as even South America. So when you're looking, don't feel like when you come to the American Ancestors website that you're going to be restricted to just getting records from New England. It's really much more than that. And now if we look across, we also have the ability to sort of slice and dice the available information. And you can see we have a significant number of records from all 50 states and Washington, D.C. involved here. As I said before, it's not just New England. You see our largest resources here are from New York, but then also Pennsylvania and certainly Massachusetts. With our background being here, there's quite a bit of information from Massachusetts as well. So this is all an interesting view. I think one of the questions we saw coming in from people attending the presentation today is, why is American Ancestors useful to me? What is unique and different about it? So I wanted to give you an idea on our databases. We have those 450 some odd databases, and about over 200 of those are unique to American Ancestors. You can't find these in other locations. So yeah, obviously I'm not going to list 200 of those for you today, but to give you some categorization of areas where we have some unique assets. One of those is genealogical journals. We have the New England Historic Genealogical Register, which has been published since 1845 on a quarterly basis. It has extensive information, including solving some really interesting genealogical problems, as well as other kinds of records in the publication. TAG, or the American Genealogist. We've recently actually become the publisher of the Mayflower Descendant, working with the Mayflower Society. But we have a lot of online genealogical journals where the names have been indexed, which can be providing a really useful resource for you. Another category where we have unique databases is here in the Massachusetts probate file papers. So a number of sites have published index information about probate, what names are, or what people's estates have been processed in what location. We've been working with the court here in Massachusetts to bring a lot of those databases online, and more recently we released the first 21,000 cases in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, which is what includes Boston, for example, just a few weeks ago. So this is literally millions of pages of probate file papers that are available, and things that you can't see anywhere else. And in many other locations beyond this, like personally having done some research in New York State, as Ginevra mentioned, I have some New York ancestors. They charge you to get copies of the probate records. And if you don't actually go to their location, they charge you a lot more to get those probate records. So this is really, I think, a great resource, having those Massachusetts probate file papers available for quite a number of counties here in Massachusetts. The two that have had probably the most discussion over the last year here at the library, one is our agreement with the Archdiocese of Boston to index and present the sacramental records for the Archdiocese of Boston. When we say sacramental, we're referring to things like baptisms and marriages, deaths. There's even sick calls, formerly known as last rites, quite a lengthy set of information. So we've been going parish by parish and making this available. And because of the real interest in getting access to this information, we actually release them in two different ways. As we go through the records for each parish, we first provide what we call a browsable collection, which will have the actual images of the volumes for a given parish within the Archdiocese, so you can read through them. And then we have our volunteers working feverishly feverishly to go index the names and dates and information from those records. And as soon as they're available for a searchable version, we have a separate database that is searchable by name. And we'll talk about some of the indexing on that before. So this is comes to us through a great partnership with the Archdiocese of Boston and through the really hard work of our volunteers, which we're, of course, always looking for more to do that indexing work. And the other one, which I think is an exciting one, especially as we approach 1620, is the Mayflower fifth generation descendants. So we have an arrangement with the General Society of Mayflower Descendants to publish the fifth generation descendants of the original Mayflower passengers, providing a rich index of those people, spouses, and children, and then that set of pages from the books, which are popularly known as the Silver Books. So for those who are interested, as we get close to 1620, determining if you have Mayflower ancestors, this is going to be a great location. So if you get a match into that book in the fifth generation, then you may have additional work to submit the paperwork, but you know that your ancestries will get you in as a member of the Mayflower Society. So on that one, this is an ongoing project that will finish sometime next year. There's about 31 volumes for us to go through. We have 15 of them indexed and out, and more are coming all of the time. So that gives you a little bit of perspective. One of the things I would like to do is go, as we go through this, try to really point out where people have problems. And probably one of the areas where we have a lot of problems reported by people doing research on this is they get a page like this, where I put in a bunch of search terms and I have no results. You have that unfortunate little message here that says your search did not return any documents. So this is actually because the way our search engine works is that any record we return has to match all of the search criteria you provide. So if you put in more criteria, or there's some slight variance between what you put in and what's been indexed, you will get no records. So as we go through the session today, I'll probably mention this a few times, but we'll talk about some of those strategies for doing search so you don't run into these kinds of problems and you can get the most out of your search experience here at the library. So the second biggest area of concern is being logged in. So you come to AmericanAncestors.org and just make sure you've been logged in. There's certain sets of information available for you if you're not logged in, but it's very limited. And so the way you can tell is if you see the login button and you don't see something like your name on this page, then chances are pretty good that you're not logged in. So what we would do is, if you are logged in, then you would see here in the heading of your browser, welcome, and then your name, saying that you have now successfully logged into the site. And now we have information about your membership level. We know what kinds of information to present you, and you can go forth and do your searching. If you want more information about your account here at American Ancestors, you can click on the My Account button in the heading, and then you'll be taken to a page where we'll give information about your account, in this case, my account, where I'm a staff member. But for the rest of you, that would show the kind of membership you have. You might be a guest member, you could be an individual or family or another level of member. It'll give you the information about what that membership level is that you have, your expiration date, that sort of thing. And then here we can see some summary of the kinds of memberships that we have. The guest membership is completely free. You can come to the website, register, provide email address, mailing address, and some other information, and then you'll have access to a set of information that's made available to those guest members at no cost. If you are a guest member, you do not get access to every database, but you do get access to a significant number of databases. Here we have a brief list. This information is also available on the website. If you were to click on that, the membership information at AmericanAncestors.org/membership, you can get the details on this, including the list of databases that are accessible to you with a guest membership. So and then before we start delving into some of the details, I just also like to point out that as we go through, if we've designed the search experience here, we do support multiple browsers. So you can use Chrome, Edge from Microsoft, Firefox, Internet Explorer Release 11 and later, as well as Safari. So really all the common browsers are supported. We don't normally have issues with browser support. And if you're using a mobile device, say a phone or a tablet, you can also use that to access that information. Obviously, on a phone, you have a lot less screen real estate to deal with, but you can certainly get to the information and actually do searches, which may be helpful when someone asks you a question about some relation of yours and you want a little extra information. You can get that directly from your phone. So with that background, let's start digging into getting access to the records. So I'm actually going to start with Browse. I think Browse is an excellent way to get a little bit better perspective on what resources might be useful to you is when you start your search experience, as opposed to just diving directly in and putting in names and dates and trying to get records. So if you come to the Browse path, you would start here up at the top of the screen. You pick Browse rather than Search, and then the very top item there is the database list A to Z. So if you click on that, you're presented with this page. Now this page is, by default, the list of all of the databases that we currently have. So it shows here we have 455 databases. They're displayed alphabetically. If you look at on the left-hand side there where it says search by database name, you can actually search for the name of a database. And you can actually search for more than that. If you're interested in what databases relate to the state of Vermont, you can type in Vermont in that field, or even the abbreviation VT, and we'll give you a list of the databases that are particular to the state of Vermont or have some relationship to Vermont. Help you just get an idea of what resources you might have. Now you also see there's some items there like different kinds of databases. For example, my preference is to search for databases that have images with them. And when we say an image, we're referring to a picture of a source document or from a book or a magazine. I can restrict my search to just seek those. We'll talk about favorites in a few minutes, or only free databases. But one of the things people sometimes forget to do is page further down that page. So we have that, I think there'll be a recurring theme here to get the most of the website. You need to page down and see what else is there. So if you page down here, you can see more ways of categorizing and looking at our resources. So you see country names are at the top, you have date ranges, and in all of these entries, there's a little number in parentheses, and that's the number of databases that are in that grouping of things. So if you want to pick a date range, you can see the databases from 1750 to 1799. I can also go down to categories and pick census tax voter lists or genealogies and biographies. So this gives you a great way of trying to get a little better view on what those 455 databases really are. Now, if you click forward and you note there's a set of 4 icons next to each one of those databases. The first one looks like a little magnifying glass, says, I'm interested in this database. I want to go off and do a search on it. So if I clicked on that icon, then I would go off and I would be given the search form with, in this case, American Ancestors Magazine, all pre-populated in my search criteria. The next icon is the letter I in a circle. This is, I want to get just information about this database, so I can go and get a description of that database. I get a little more depth of information about what's available. In the case of something like a magazine, what years of that publication are available online. Then the next icon is an indicator whether this is a index-only database or it has images. We talked about databases with images a moment ago. If you see the icon that is circled here that looks like a camera, that says we have images for this database. And if you look at the ones a little higher at the top of the page, it looks like a dog-eared corner of a piece of paper, then that says that's an index-only database. So just some other information that help you out to understand what you're doing. And then the asterisk is something that says this is one of my favorites. And we'll talk specifically on how to set the favorites, but you do have that ability to set one or more databases as your favorites, and will have a search option to be able to use favorites to restrict your search going forward. So with that, let's start diving into search in a little more detail. So I'm going to start off talking from category level search, and because this is something where I'm happy to say we've been doing a bunch of work this year to start improving or expanding the user interface and the capabilities of our search site. And this category search is one of those areas where we just recently made some enhancements. So I'll refer to the form here that we're under the label database search as our advanced search page. And you can always use this to search by category. You can see that there's a category pull down there. But if we page down, you notice that it says search by category. So if we just page forward or page down the screen, we can see that we now have a list of what are those categories of databases on the left. And what we've been doing is trying to give people a better way to just use the search terms that are relevant to that category and not necessarily use ones for which you might not get any matches. And I'll give you some specific examples in just a moment. So those are links to the new category-specific searches. And on the right, one of the things we did, we used to have our help information was sort of tucked away in a little pop-out on the right-hand side of the screen. We're trying to make sure the help is available to you wherever you are in the system. So when you're on the search page or we get into the results page, those help links in terms of how to do search, how to find a video tutorial, those kinds of things are all available to you all the time. You don't have to go looking for them in some other location. So let's, if we click forward then, we can go and take a look at one of the examples. So here I'm going to show you the category of vital records. So you notice that the search page there at the top has fewer fields on it. What we're doing is we're presenting only the fields that are generally used by the databases in the vital records category. One of the important reasons we do this is because if you use the advanced search page and I picked a field that's not available, like for example, a relationship type, then I would get no records. So this is then telling us that these are the fields that you can use pretty much across the set of databases we have for vital records. And then we provide immediately below the screen search tips. So this one tells you what are the searchable fields there. You're seeing first and last name, year, record type, and location, an indication of how you can use wildcards and where. If you are curious while you're on the screen, you want to say, well, what are the databases in the vital records category? We have a button up at the top right that will say, show me all of the databases in this category. And if I accidentally missed and I clicked on vital records and I wanted something else, the other categories that I'm not looking at are all available on the right, so I can just toggle over to a different category and do a search there. So, so this is our first step then, providing a tailored search experience based on the category of information that you're looking at. And we're hoping that people find it very useful. So as I said before, it's always good to page down. So below those, we have the search tips right at the top of the page. We also now are putting for each of these categories what we call some sample images. So if you're not sure what kinds of things you might find, we'll have between 1 and 3 sample images for each category with a little explanation of what you might see. And then there's a full description of what that database is about. You know, the text that we have that explains in the category what are the major collections in that category and more information about them. Now those sample images are a little small on the screen, so if I were to pick, say, that baptism record of John Williams, who was first bishop in Boston, then you can actually see, in this case, the handwritten baptismal information from 1822 for John Williams, the Archbishop of Boston. So just a way of providing a little more accessible, I think, useful information to understand what's in one of these categories. So one of the tips we have on category search is that we're also trying out something that's important and different, in that, as I said before, when you use the advanced search screen today, whatever criteria you put in, the records that come back must meet that criteria or they will not be displayed. So that's what I would call a must-fit search approach. What we're trying out with these separate category searches is a best fit. So if you're putting in multiple criteria and we have some records that meet some of the criteria or many of the criteria, then those will come out first in your results, and things that have fewer matches will come out further down the list. So it's another way of providing some flexibility in how you do search and the kind of results you get. So I'll show you a specific example if we go forward. So we'll use the category of journals and periodicals. And one of the things worth mentioning in journals and periodicals is that the years are actually publication years, not the event year. But I'm going to do a simple test. I want information about someone with the rather unusual first name of Byfield. And I think there may have been an article about extracts from a letter from the governor So I'll put the name of the article in, which is one of the things that you can do to do a search based on the title of the article within that periodical. So if I put those two fields in and then do a search, when I press enter, what I get back in this case is 84 records. Now, only the first two records met both criteria. There's a byfield Lloyd, and then there's a couple of different page references, but they belong to this article of the extracts of letters from Governor Belcher to Mr. Prince. So if you executed the same search on advanced search, you would get 2 records. What we get actually here is further down using a lower relevance score is the technical term we use. Are other things where they matched maybe on the first name, and if you look at, for example, on this highlighted row, we've matched the first name byfield, but we also found the word Prince in an article title. So this one shows up. It may or may not be directly useful to you, but it gives you a little more flexible perspective in terms of finding something that is a best fit to what you have in your search criteria. Now, the default for searching is what we call a relevance score. If you've never paid attention to the field here, which I admit when I was first starting, I didn't either, then that says we're going to show you the results in relevance, meaning how well they fit your search terms. You have some other options there, and we'll need to set that up so that if you want to do this sort of a broad search of a best fit, well, searching by last name or date can give you some surprisingly not useful results. But if you go by the relevance-based searching, then I think this approach will give you a good way of doing some searches and getting some results back that you might not have found using our existing advanced search capability. So we're interested, it's become available. We've announced it. We will talk more at the end, but we have a newsletter called DB News, and if you sign up, we give you news whenever we publish a new database. We also publish information about any new capabilities in our search capabilities that are available online to you. So if you're interested, you could sign up for the newsletter. But we're also interested in your feedback. So if you look at search results, I'll talk about how to submit comments in a few minutes. Feel free to give us questions, comments, or general feedback about anything new that you see. So we're going to switch away. We'll go henceforth in the presentation. We will be doing searches based on our existing advanced search capability, because you can search for any kind of record or any area. So I think we'll start off by looking at the general issue of searching for vital records, and we'll look at some of the strategies we have for getting you the kind of things you would like to know in your search results. So the first rule in general is, start with a few terms and then add more. So if I want to search for a specific database, we mentioned the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. So if I want to search for vital record type information, which comes from that database, I can put in a name and I can pick the database. So I'm going to do a search against Roman Catholic Archdiocese. I might enter a name. Let's say I enter Anna Dwyer and then hit enter. What I get back then after I hit this enter, I said hit the search button, excuse me, is I get information about Ann Dwyer and the set of results, like hopefully many of you have seen, but if not, they'll show up in a relevant sequence. A couple of things that we've added recently to those search results. One is this little write a comment box on the left. So I mentioned before that we'd love to get feedback or comments from you. We used to have a button that said report an error on this page. We actually would like to be a little more open-ended about what comes through. So if you just have a comment or a question or other feedback, you start typing in that box, and then it'll let you send us a message. And when we get that message, we'll actually get the information about what you were looking at when you sent the message. So we'll have a context to give you some feedback on that. But once I have then gotten these results, I can click on one of the items. So I'll click on the name Ann Dwyer up there at the top, and then I'll get the details for that record. Now, in this case, you may have noticed that you saw a camera next to that entry in the search results, which says we have an image. So this is the image of a baptismal information for Anna Dwyer, and you'll notice one of the interesting things about having worked with the Catholic Church records is there's a lot of Latin on the page. So we have had the usual challenge of doing indexing of handwritten records, but in this case also trying to provide appropriate translations of names and things into our index. So you can see that information, but the other there's more that you can see. So I talked earlier about paging down. Make sure you page down on these screens. So let's page down on the image display screen, and there's some information, new information that we've added to the bottom of the page that you might not have noticed before from an update we did earlier this year. Oops. Well, and what you'll see on that is information about how to do searches on your database. So we can click forward to the next slide. So what you see here is, I'm showing you see the bottom of that page we were looking at before, is we start off with information about the citation, and with the exception of Edge, you can press a button and copy the citation into your clipboard. And the reason Microsoft has determined that at this point they don't want to let the browser use the commands in your browser page copy into clipboard, unfortunately. So they've made that choice probably for security reasons, but all of the other browser suppliers enable copy citation. So if you come to this page and you happen to be using Microsoft Edge, maybe you've got a new laptop, you would not see that copy citation. However, you can certainly use your mouse and just do a simple highlight and copy and paste this. So the reason that we think this is useful is, for many of us, we capture this information. We want to put it into our genealogy program of choice. So if I can copy and paste the citation information, that would be great. The other thing we've done is the actual URL. So if you look right here in the citation area, you see that we have a relatively short URL, which will get you back to this page. So the URL in your browser will be a relatively long name. This is sort of a permanent link URL that you can put into your tree product that's a little bit shorter if you're printing or need references, and you can use that as a shorthand way to get back to the record. Then further down, we have the description of the database from the record that you're currently looking at, and we have search tips down below that. So this was information, these things that you're seeing at the bottom were not available a year ago, but we've made them available to you now, and hopefully this saves you the trouble of doing a lot of clicking around the database. This information was there before, it just wasn't available as conveniently as we tried to make it. And I made a mention of that write a comment space. We have right here that ability to submit a comment to us on this image for this page right there on the page. So if we go forward, now for every record that's an image, we also have a transcript. And if it's an image, if we have an index-only collection, you will only have a transcript page. But I mentioned that in the particular case of the Archdiocese records here, that we have a lot of Latin names. So we have, Anam, an Agnes, which has been translated into an English name. We figured that if, for most of us who are doing research on our ancestors, that we're not likely to be converting their names into Latin to do a search. So as best we can, we're trying to provide translated names from the Latin that's on the original certificate to the likely English translation of those names to make it more accessible. But just as we had on the image page, if you page down on the transcript page, then we'll have that same kind of information available to you about the citation information and the description and the search tips and the comments. So whether it doesn't matter if you're using a index only or an index and image, that same information is available when you're looking at the details in your display. So if we move beyond, let's talk about another technique. So I mentioned favorites a little while ago. And favorites can be very useful. If you go through and you browse through databases, for example, and you think there's 2 or 3 different databases you'd like to be able to search, but not necessarily have your search results include every possible database that's available on American Ancestors, you can use the favorites capability to manage that. So if we click forward here, there's 2 places where you can set your favorites. So one of those is you're looking at a record, either in the image or the transcript viewer. You'll see circled over here, we have a button marked favorite, and that will toggle it on and off. So I'm looking at a record, I want to add this one to my favorites. I click that. If it's already in my favorites, I can click on it and take it off. The other place we can go and do similar functionality, if we click forward, is from that database A to Z list. So I mentioned that before. This right-hand column in the database list A to Z is the stars of databases that I've marked as favorites. So in my example here, if I'm really interested in my early New England ancestors, I might pick and flag these 3 databases. Great Migration Begins has all the early arrivals to New England, the Mayflower Descendant publication, and then the actual silver books. So I can make my 3 favorites as my section. In the browser, I can list those 3 databases, and then if I go forward into the search transaction, you see there, if you hadn't noticed it before, you have that database type where I can now say, just search my favorite databases for whatever search terms I come in through. So I'm searching for William Bradford. I can say, just search my favorite databases, and then it'll go off and restrict my William Bradford search to, in my case, those 3 databases, but in yours, any combination of databases you would like to have. So that can be a nice time saver if you're doing work on a family or a certain time period and you want or a certain area of the country, that you can use favorites to help essentially provide a customized search that just addresses the resources that you're interested in. So let's turn over to some of the genealogy category databases and what some of the search terms that are available and the capabilities that you have there. So I'm going to use examples for a few minutes from the Mayflower family's 5th generation descendants, which is now available here. You can see that highlighted in red. And I'm going to do a search for Lois Fuller and a name. Now, my strong recommendation whenever you're doing searching is you put in as few criteria as you can think of at the starting point. Don't put, if you happen to know when you think Lois Fuller was born and died, or where, or I want to look for a specific record type, I would recommend starting with essentially a name and then start refining your search from there. So in this case, I can select search, and I'll come back and I'll see the results that are available here for Lois Fuller, which is the same kind of approach we've seen before. One of the things that you can use this view of search results for is to get a good understanding of what kind of things have been captured in that database. So if I look here in the Mayflower family 5th generation, it tells me several things about the database and what I've been able to, what I can see from this database, or what's been indexed. So I have information about the name of the database and its category. In this case, it's under the genealogies, biographies, heraldry, and local histories. I also have the information that includes the date of birth. In this case, it's a full date, not just a year. The location that birth took place, the volume of the publication that we're getting the information from, including the page. We have something that's called text, which we'll talk about a little bit later about doing keyword searches. But in this particular case, we've built into the text related to the record, essentially the lineage of Lois Fuller back to John Billington. She says it happens to be a descendant of John Billington, but you can follow that lineage back, and that's something we populated into the text of those records. And then we've also captured here the parents. And if we just sort of browse down the page, we can see that we've also captured in some marriage records the spouse. So not all databases have this level of information, but it's one of the things you can look at to think about when you're updating your search terms. Make sure the things you want to search against are things that indeed you'll find in the results for that database. So I can go off and I can click on Lois Fuller. And in this case, this is from the silver books, and now I go directly to the page where I have the definition of Lois Fuller, as opposed to a vital record type database. Here I'm seeing obviously the information about her and her immediate family. I understand I get birth, death, marriage, information about the children, all is available to me right here on this one page. So this is, I think, a really excellent example of rich indexing. And it takes quite a bit of work for our volunteers to capture all of this information, all of these records out of these pages, because it's pretty dense information. And if you look at Lois Fuller, she's got birth, marriage, and death. We have information about her spouse. We have birth for each of her children. So just this 2 inches of text probably has about 15 or 20 different records in it. And but by doing that kind of work, it makes the results much more accessible for you and help you get to the kind of information you need faster. So we mentioned that the 1.4 billion terms a couple of times. This is just an interesting view on a word cloud showing the top 50 names that we have in that 1.4 billion. So we have something like over 8 million Smiths. I guess most of us are not shocked to hear that Smith is one of the most popular names. But there certainly are a lot of popular names here that you'll see. And just to if we go forward, just a thing that I'll probably lighten up on this as we go forward, but really make sure you start with a few fields and then add them incrementally. But we say that, how to add them incrementally. So let me just make sure, if you haven't tried it, let me just walk you through the process of starting with a broad query and then refining it in a couple of different cases. So we go back to our example with the search results on Lois Fuller, and we got 17 records for Lois Fuller. In the scheme of things, that's not a gigantic number of records to browse through. But if I know something about my Lois Fuller, and I don't think she was, from Plymouth County, Massachusetts, or Kingston, I'm pretty sure that she was born and lived in, say, New Hampshire. I can use this refine button. If I go up to the refine button, it'll take my query and it'll take me back to the query screen and let me go put in additional or change my search criteria. So when we started this, we had Lois Fuller. Well, now I want to just put in New Hampshire in. So I'm going to change one search term. Then I can press search. And I come back and I can see that there's only 2 results now, you see here, and they're Lois Fuller, and they both happen to be Lois Fuller in New Hampshire. So it's a simple approach to use, and what will happen is if you have a bunch of results and you change a term and you end up with no records, then you know that that search criteria that you just entered might be the cause of the problem why you were getting 0 records returned. So I'll go through some other additional advanced techniques for you here. Go a little bit faster for the next few slides because I think we've gone through the basics of search. But do some techniques that some of you may or may not have tried. So one of those is using relations. So I talked about in the Mayflower 5th generation descendants that we have relationship information. You can see here for Samuel Fuller, we have information with spouse, father, and whatnot. So if I go back to refine my search, I can go to the next screen, and down at the bottom of the search area, you can see this thing. It says family members, and there's a pull down there, and I can pick a relationship, father, mother, spouse, or just any. And then I can put a first and last name in there. As a number of us have found over researching, people are sometimes interesting or use interesting spellings. It's oftentimes useful to just search with a first name, just in case things were indexed differently. So I might say, but I want Samuel Fuller, son of Ebenezer. So I put a father Ebenezer and then click search. And now I will get just the records that have Ebenezer Fuller as the father. And just as a careful warning, we talked about before that if the record doesn't have all of the criteria, doesn't get returned, not every one of our records has a father in it. So that's another good reason why I would start general and then add this, but now I can find, in this case, the birth records for Samuel Fuller, son of Ebenezer. And you can see there's been a couple of different Ebenezers, but nevertheless, it can be a really powerful technique to reduce your search criteria. Now, another one is exact search, which I guess I would say use with caution. If you're really sure that you know the proper spelling or you think how you're going to find it, then you can say, I can refine this to say, don't do this automated technique of finding me near matches on spelling. So in this case, I've searched for LeClair. It's a variation of my last name, you probably noticed. It's was spelled with amazing variety across records in the United States. It's spelled probably with every combination of vowels I can think of. But if I really wanted to make sure that I do a search for Lois LeClair spelled exactly the way I put it in, I can hit the refine button again. And then you see right above the name field, there it says exact search. You check that box that says the only records that will come back are Louise spelled that way with LeClair spelled as provided there. And I can now press search. And now I will get the one record in the 1920 census that matches my criteria. So, I've had people say, why am I getting these names I didn't ask for? And that's because we have some interesting technology called fuzzy search that looks for names that are with essentially 1 or 2 letters of what you typed in to help allow for that variability in spelling. So this idea of exact search can also be applied to the location field, and they can be done independently. So this can be something that's really useful, for example, for searching census information. I can go in and say, I want Monroe County, New York, United States. That's our convention. We go from city to county to state to country, or maybe region if you want to be more flexible than saying state. But if I say exact, then it means the locations that come back have to match those criteria exactly. So I can see here a variety of spellings, but they're all from Monroe County, different towns, but all in Monroe County in New York. And we'll go back to one other specialized thing on name, which is Soundex. If some of you probably have heard of Soundex, it was invented in the 1930s as part of a Works Product Administration project to index United States Census information. And basically it helps to account a different way of accounting for variations in spelling. We use the first letter of the last name, essentially skip vowels and duplicate letters, and then it gets internally turned into a code for search. Fortunately, to use it, you don't have to know any of that. You can just click on Soundex, put in whatever the name is you want to search for. You do a search, and then you will get search based on that Soundex criteria, which sometimes will be just great, and sometimes you'll see unusual things in that you see LeClair. You see variations on LeClair, which is maybe what I was looking for in my case, but you also see LEGLER, and that's because in the Soundex technique, it'll say, well, a G is kind of like a C in some ways in the way people do their writing, so we'll include those. So it's a tool in your arsenal for search and can be helpful in certain kinds of records, and it's good to be able to know how to use it. Another technique is keyword searching. So we'll say in our search tips, if you want to search in the keywords field, so I'll use this interesting database on the historical data on cities and towns. If I click on do a search on this and look at the search tips, it says search by keywords. So if I go to the search screen, so rather than filling in the other fields like the name, I'm just going to use keywords. I'm going to search for information about Orange, Massachusetts. So I just type the word Orange in keywords and press search. And that will get me back to information about Orange in its various uses in various cities and towns or parts of the state of Massachusetts. And if I click on one of those records, say the first one, I get historical information then about Orange, which happens to be in Franklin County, get some facts about when it was founded, how it was split off from other areas, any name changes and things like that. So it's a really useful book, but it's also one where you have to take advantage of doing keyword searches. So that one's based on the text that's associated in the record. I talked to you briefly about the text we had on Mayflower Society Silver Book entries that had some things in text. So if you know that there's text on a database, you can use this keyword search capability to search for that. Okay, then just a couple of things left. I want to talk a little bit about searching journals and journal databases. So that is one of the areas where we have quite a bit of content here. We won't go through this in detail, but this is pretty much all unique content to American ancestors, and having these various kinds of articles from this and other journals, if we click forward, including the run of the New England Historic Genealogical Register, which we have 2 million records from 1847 available online as of today. It's quite a treasure trove of information, and there's some things to think about as far as searching journals. So if we click forward from here, for journals, you're going to search for names and then article titles. You can do it as a category. You can use individual volumes. If you happen to know you're in a specific volume, you can even mention a page number to do a search. So if we look forward at the next page, if I want to do a search, I can pick the category of journals and periodicals. This is from the advanced search page. We also talked about the category search earlier, but this is the traditional way of doing that. And then I can put in this case, a name like Samuel Goodley. The years when you search, if you were to specify years, which I generally wouldn't recommend, those are the years of publication, not the year of the events in the publication. So if I just stop here, I say do a search on Samuel Goodley. I press the search key. I get information from Samuel Goodley. As I said, the years are mentioned here, the year of publication, not the year of the record. So if I were to click on Samuel Goodley and go see the details for him, then I can see, for example, here in the Pennsylvania Genealogical Magazine, what is the information that comes up for Samuel Goodley. And I happen to have records of marriage for Samuel Goodley. Now you notice that the entry in the index was for the year of publication. The entry in the page, it happens to be a marriage in 1834. The way we index these kinds of these kinds of resources is by publication year, and we don't normally capture the individual records. It's just we're doing the name search of Samuel Goodley as mentioned in the Genealogical Magazine. So I won't go into a lot more detail on this. We actually have a full webinar specifically on searching journals, which really goes through, I think, a nice perspective on what's the range of things we have and how to go about doing searching and more detailed items about how to do searches of those journals. So I'll do briefly before we start question and answer, things that are coming soon. We talked about the category specific search. What we have in process right now is a database specific search, in which case we would have a page available for each database where we would present only the fields that are relevant for that database. Once again, if you're going to do a database specific search, that will help you to be able to only use the relevant search fields, avoid that problem of getting no records back. For each one of those, we will include, of course, the search tips, descriptions, and sample images for each database, and that will come out sometime next year. As soon as it's ready, we'll roll it out, but the development is underway, and that is coming soon. And it will look remarkably like what you just saw for the category search, except here we'll search the database, Suffolk County Mass Probate. These are the relevant fields. And so the look and feel will be very similar to what we have on the other pages, just with focused set of fields for each database. So as I said, just as conclusion here, database news is a great way to get information about both new databases as well as new capabilities that are coming out. For example, this was a screenshot from a few days ago. When we announced that category search capability as being available on the website, it came out in database news, and you can go read more about that. And every time we do any new enhancements in the user interface, as soon as those are available, we will let you know. So all you have to do is sign up for database news. Is you would go to the database news, database news at americanancestors.org, and then simply enter your email address. And then you will get these emails. You get notified as soon as the new database is put online. You'll get an email, so you'll know about it and see what might help you out with your research as we go forward. The other thing that's just to make sure that you're aware of is that we do have other additional resources in terms of learning resources and how to use American Ancestors. So in addition to this webinar that you just attended, we also have other additional resources available at the URL below in terms of learning resources or study guides on how to use search. And those are all perfectly valid. So I would just like to thank you all for joining us. We had those 1.4 billion searchable names. Hopefully this approach of starting broad and incrementally refining will help you with your search criteria. Take advantage of database search tips. They're there to help make sure that you find the things you want without wasting your time. So I think it's worth taking a look at those, and hopefully by making them more conveniently available, it'll be easy for you to use them while you're doing searching. And as always, the webmaster at nehgas.org is manned by those of us that work in the web team. So if you have questions, problems, we're happy to help. Just send us an email. So with that, I think I'd like to take it back to Ginevra and see what kind of questions we might be able to answer for the next few minutes.
All right, thank you, John. We covered a lot there. And just a reminder, everyone, you will be able to watch a recording of this on our website, and I will post that later today. But a few questions. A number of people asked about wildcards. Are wildcards supported throughout our databases? Are they only supported for some of our databases? Could you comment on that?
That's a great question. Yeah, so wildcards are associated with name fields and I believe location names, but they're most typically used in the name fields. And yes, you can use those on any database. So we should see that the search tips include how to use the wildcards on every page, but you should be able to expect that you can use that, and then we show you what characters to use for a general set of characters or substituting for specific characters in a name. So yes, it's always available and is another technique that can help you out with your searching.
And so Peter asks, and I think this is a great point of clarification and a good way to kind of sum up your lecture today. But Peter asks, what is the advantage of doing a category or a specific database search? So searching by the category or searching by a specific database. What is the advantage of going that route instead of doing a global search?
Sure, that's another excellent question, and that it really helps you with filtering results. So you're talking about 1.4 billion names to search. If you have a widely used name, or you have a last name like Smith, if you just go in and do a search across all of our databases at once, then you might find, for example, some databases that have huge numbers of records like censuses will overwhelm your search results. So categories are just a way to help narrow the set of results you get. So if you think that you really don't want to look at a census, I want to look at published genealogies, I could pick the category of genealogies, or I could pick the specific database if it's something that's new that's come online I've never searched before. You can do it that way. You don't have to. You're certainly welcome to do a search across the entire database and then use some of those refined techniques that I talked about before to winnow down results. But it's really just a way of getting focus in what comes back in your search results.
All right, and Charles has a question. So how does a name from a record, such as, say, a probate file, actually get to be searchable? Do we use OCR, optical character recognition? So it's kind of a machine looking through the characters and figuring out what can be searchable, or is it a manual process? And do we have individuals looking through the records and actually indexing them?
Yeah, happy to answer that question. We probably in the very early days, when you had some set of records that were typewritten in the beginning, lists of names that we could use OCR. Generally speaking, we don't use OCR at all. We require volunteers to do indexing. I think you specifically mentioned probate, which is interesting because probate is a little bit different than some things. So I'll start with probate and then talk more generically about other kinds. So with probate records, especially the file papers, which I was talking about before, a probate file may include 1 page or 500 pages, it depends. So what's important when you're searching probate is to find out what is the case number so you can get to the right file and read all of the papers in it. So what we do is people will go through the images that have been scanned in and digitized from those file folders, and we will index the names that are mentioned on the file folders along with understanding of what pages belong to that particular case. So you do a probate search. The probate search will get you to the beginning of the case file, and then you can click through the individual pages in that case. But yes, there's been some amount of work. Sometimes there are indexes available to the original probate, and we can use an OCR to start doing that. But then matching up which pages go to which case is indeed a manual process. For beyond probate, for other kinds of things like the Archdiocese sacramental records or Mayflower or pretty much anything else, pretty much people sit down with a view of an image and then a spreadsheet, or now we have some new tools for doing that indexing, and then they determine what records are on that page, and what are the names, what are the parents, dates, and key all that stuff in so you can go back and find them. So it takes great efforts by our volunteers to do that, but when we get done, we have some really nice databases to share with you.
And Diane is actually asking, do you accept volunteers for indexing?
Yeah, sorry, I almost jumped in too fast to say yes, we certainly do. We have in our team, a woman by the name of Bianca Renzoni, does this. But you could, if you're you want to use the email that's right here on the page, you can send an email to webmaster@nhs.org, and we will be happy to talk to you about helping us on volunteering. So volunteers will do work anywhere from the indexing kind of things I was talking about a few moments ago to what we call scanning or digitizing original documents, or both. So we're happy if anybody's interested in pursuing some time with us to do volunteer work. We are happy to have that, and you don't have to come into Boston to do that, but if you can, there's some things you can do. So please reach out to us. We'd be happy to have more help.
Great, and maybe just a few more questions. I know we're approaching the hour here. Judith asks, so when you write a comment, can you put in name variations? So say there's a census record and the name is butchered and it's just wrong. Can you kind of, from a user's perspective, can you type in kind of variations, and would that be reflected in future searches?
That's a great question. What's our process for accepting comments? So probably 4 or 5 days of the week, we get input from someone who points out where an index entry has got a name misspelled, or either it was written incorrectly by the whoever wrote the original document, or more likely the person who was doing the interpretation to the index misspelled it in some way, which might make it very hard to find. So you can't directly update our records, but if you send a note to Webmaster, in fact, if you're looking at the image page or the transcript page, in that comment box, just indicate what the spelling was and what the correction is. It'll include your email address for you, click send, and then within a few days we'll take a look at that, and most often we will either fix it if the original transcription is just plain wrong, or if it looks like it's an alternative spelling we can add a second spelling so that you could find the record under either spelling. So that's the kind of input that we're really happy to have, and please use that comments capability to send them into us.
All right, and there were a few questions about favorites. So Sue Ellen asks, is it possible to have multiple lists, multiple favorite lists? So say a favorite category with all the great Massachusetts, or all the great Vermont, all the great New York. Can you kind of divvy up your favorite lists by category, or by what you want to kind of use it by?
So the answer is, right at this moment, you can't have multiple sets of favorites that you toggle between. So you have a set of favorites. You can certainly change what those favorites are, but you have one set of favorites. There is another technique that we didn't get into in this session, but if you wanted to look at that from some of the help or other information, there's something called saved search. For saved search, we'll let you change. Now you can't. You can either use a specific database or specific categories, but you can take a set of search parameters and then save that as a query, give it a name, and then be able to just pull that query up and use it again. And you can have as many of those as you want. So we didn't get into it in this session, but if you look at some of the help and other information, you could look at saved search, which will get part of what you're looking for. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at Webmaster.
And also a question about favorites. Can you make an individual record a favorite? And if not, what would you recommend? Would you download or print out the image? How would you handle that?
Yeah, so the favorites are designed to be favored to databases. So you can say, I want to search this database. We don't have an ability to say, here's a favorite record. If you see a record that you would like, you do have the ability to download or print that record. So if it's an image, and let me be more specific. If you go to the image page, you can download the image or you can print the image. In the case of a transcript page, so you've got if you have a database that only has the index and therefore doesn't have images, you can print that page right from the search results. So there's a print button towards the top left. You can use that to go and print that individual page.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for today. Unfortunately, there were a number of questions about what databases we have for different regions or different time periods. I highly recommend using that browse feature that Dawn went over. That way you can select, say, New York or Canada and see what databases we have for that area. So I definitely recommend that. I also recommend looking through our archived webinars. They're all available on our website for free. You do need to log in, so as long as you have a free guest account, you will be able to use and review those webinars. And those webinars go over how to do Irish research, French Canadian, Civil War research. And in each of these, we do talk about what databases and what resources we have here at NEHGS. So I highly recommend looking through our collection of webinars. So once again, if you'd like hands-on help with your research, you may want to consider scheduling a consultation with one of our experts or hiring our research services team. If you're interested in learning more about those services, you can write to the email addresses on the current slide. And if you have questions about our databases or our website, be sure to reach out to webmaster@nehgs.org. And I will include those links, those email addresses to you in my follow-up email later today. So thank you again for joining us. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.